Part 1. The $3 Shadow. Some prices are not merely figures. They are intended to wound, to diminish, to insult the very spirit. $3 was a common enough sum in those days, perhaps the cost of a sturdy plow horse, or a generous barrel of grain if the harvest had smiled upon the land. But on that rickety wooden platform, baked beneath the unforgiving sun of the dust devil mesa, $3 was the price tag, dangling around a woman's neck. Anya stood, her chin lifted to the vast, indifferent sky, ancient symbols painted starkly on her high cheekbones, still wet as a ring of men on horseback tightened around her, circling like buzzards, anticipating carrion. When the hoarse cry of the auctioneer shattered the oppressive silence, she met the gaze of every man present, her eyes burning with an unyielding fire, and spoke 5 words that made the arid air itself grow still. What those men did not know was that she had already spilled blood, had nearly claimed 2 lives before being dragged to this cursed stage. And what the grizzled rancher, stepping forward with his crumpled, sweat-stained bills, could not possibly have known was that his $3 would unleash a force neither of them could ever hope to control. The sun, a fiery anvil in the heavens, had long passed its zenith when they first hauled her into the exposed plain. Not a single wisp of shade offered respite for miles, only cracked, thirsty earth stretching to distant mountains that shimmered and wavered like a mirage in the punishing heat. Jebediah Thorne, Jeb, to those who knew him, had lingered at the fringes of the morbid spectacle for what felt like an eternity, his gut churning at the ugly business unfolding. He'd tried to convince himself he was merely a passer-by, a ghost drifting through, that this was none of his concern. But there was something about the way she carried herself, a fierce dignity even with her wrists bound in iron, that compelled him to stay. Barnaby Quill, the auctioneer, known as Barney to the rough men of the mesa, was a man perpetually slick with sweat, his shirt clinging to him like a second skin. He'd peddled human wares before, countless times, but never had he encountered a soul who looked at him with such cold, unwavering intent, as if memorizing his very features for a retribution yet to come. He cleared his throat, a dry rasp, and gestured with a trembling hand toward the platform. 2 hulking men shoved her forward. She ascended the wooden steps with a grace that defied her bonds, never faltering, never once glancing back. High above them all, she stood, and Jeb saw the painted symbols adorning her face more clearly now, the markings of a warrior. Her dark braids, woven with feathers and beads, cascaded past her shoulders, catching the stark desert light. The fringed garment she wore rippled almost imperceptibly in the hot breeze. She made no move to shield herself, no attempt to avert her gaze. Every rigid line of her body screamed the same defiant truth. Asterisk. You may chain me, but you will not break me. Asterisk. Barney Quill fumbled with a yellowed piece of paper, squinting hard. A native woman, he announced, his voice regaining some of its bluster. Age unknown, captured 3 weeks past near the Whispering Sands Badlands. Strong, healthy. He paused, and Jeb watched him swallow hard. A nervous gulp. History of asterisk resistance, asterisk. A crude laugh erupted from somewhere in the crowd. That's a fancy way of putting it, Barney. The auctioneer's face flushed. Bidding starts at $5. He barked, his voice cracking slightly on the final word. Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence. Barney's grin faltered. $4? More silence. Horses shifted restlessly. High above, a hawk cried out, a mournful sound. $3. Barney finally conceded, a note of desperation now creeping into his tone. $3 for. That's when she spoke. Her voice, rough from disuse, yet clear and sharp, cut across the desert like a honed blade. "I'd rather die." The words hung in the scorching air, weighty and chilling. Several men exchanged uneasy glances. One, unnerved, turned his horse abruptly and rode off without a single word. Barney tried desperately to recover. $3! Do I hear $3? Jeb felt his hand moving toward his pocket before his conscious mind even registered the intent. He pulled out the crumpled bills, soft and worn from years of honest labor, and stepped forward. The crowd parted slightly, creating a reluctant path to the platform. He avoided the eyes of the other men, offered no acknowledgement to Barney. His gaze, unerring, went straight to her. She looked down at him, her expression unreadable. And for a fleeting instant, Jeb saw something flicker across her face. Not hope, something harder than that. Recognition, perhaps. Of what, he couldn't say. He held up the money. $3. Barney snatched the bills with eager haste, as if fearful Jeb might rescind his offer. "Sold. Take her and go." But Jeb didn't move to lead her anywhere. He simply stood there, looking up at the woman on the platform, and realized with a jolt that he had absolutely no idea what came next. Neither did she, and that stark uncertainty stretched taut between them, like a rope pulled to its breaking point. What neither of them knew, what Barney Quill had conveniently omitted, was one crucial detail about why the bidding had plummeted so low. By the time the sun dipped below the western horizon, that detail would prove more vital than the $3 ever could. The chains were the first to go. Jeb reached for the iron cuffs around her wrists, and Anya recoiled with such savage force that she nearly lost her footing on the platform. The lingering crowd, eager to distance themselves from the transaction and its unsettling aftermath, had quickly dispersed, though a few stragglers remained mounted at the edge of the plain, their watchful eyes fixed upon them. Jeb kept his hands open, palms clearly visible. "I'm taking these off." She said nothing. Her amber eyes tracked his every movement, sharp and predatory, like a she-wolf guarding her den. As he stepped closer, she spat, the phlegm landing at his feet. The gesture was deliberate, measured, devoid of panic, pure, unadulterated contempt. He unlocked the cuffs regardless. They fell to the wooden platform with a dull, echoing clang. And for the first time since she'd been dragged to this place, her wrists were free. Raw, chafed skin showed where the cold metal had bitten deep for weeks. She didn't rub the angry marks, didn't acknowledge the pain. Instead, with fluid, unhurried grace that belied her recent captivity, she stepped down from the platform. Jeb watched her scan the horizon. He could almost see her calculating distances, mapping every possible escape route. The nearest cover, a sparse cluster of scrub brush, was at least 2 miles to the north. The jagged mountains to the east would require a full day's arduous trek on foot. South lay nothing but an endless, shimmering expanse of open desert. West led back to the scattered settlements. "Got a horse tied up over there," Jeb said, gesturing toward his sturdy mare, tethered near a small, wind-gnarled mesquite. "Food in the saddlebag, water." Anya's gaze snapped back to him, and he saw something in her expression that made him take an involuntary step back. Not fear, not even anger, but something far colder. "You think $3 buys my gratitude?" Her voice, rough from disuse, was surprisingly clear, her English impeccable, albeit with an accent that told him she had encountered settlers before. That made it worse, somehow. She understood precisely what was happening here. Jeb shook his head. "I don't want your gratitude." "Then, what do you want?" It was a fair question, and he found he had no easy answer. The truth was a tangled knot, buried beneath years of choices he'd rather not examine too closely. So, he offered the simplest version, to make sure you don't die out here. She laughed then, a harsh, humorless sound. Men like you don't save people like me. You collect us. You put us in houses that feel like cages, and you call it kindness. Before he could respond, she moved with terrifying speed. Snatching a fist-sized rock from the parched earth, she hurled it at the remaining spectators. It struck one man's horse squarely in the flank. The animal reared violently, its rider tumbling into the dust. The other men shouted, their hands flying to their rifles. Jeb instantly stepped between them and Anya, his hands raised in a calming gesture. Go on. Get out of here. That savage just attacked. I said, go asterisk. Something in his voice, an unspoken command, made them hesitate. Perhaps it was his reputation in these parts. Perhaps it was the hard, unyielding glint in his eyes that conveyed he was in no mood for argument. Whatever it was, they turned their horses and galloped away, kicking up plumes of dust as they vanished. When Jeb turned back, Anya was already running. She didn't head for the distant mountains or the settlements. She bolted straight into the vast, open desert, toward nothing but blistering heat and crushing emptiness. Her bare feet churned up sand with each desperate stride, and Jeb stood there, watching her shrinking figure, knowing she wouldn't make it 3 miles before the merciless sun finished what the chains had begun. He also knew that if he chased her now, she would fight him with every ounce of strength she had left, and perhaps that was exactly what she wanted. Perhaps dying free in the desert was preferable to whatever she imagined he was offering. But there was something she didn't know yet, a crucial detail Barney Quill had whispered to him while counting the blood money. That one already put a knife through 2 men who tried to claim her. One of them bled out in a wagon. The other lost an eye. Jeb watched her silhouette grow smaller against the searing horizon. She wasn't running from him. She was running toward the only choice she believed she had left, and if he let her go, she would be dead before the sun touched the western hills. What happened next would determine whether his $3 had bought her life, or merely delayed her death. Jeb gave her 10 minutes. Long enough for the crushing weight of her decision to settle upon her, not long enough to die from it. Then he mounted his mare, Shadow, and rode after her, keeping his distance at first. She must have heard the rhythmic hoofbeats, but she never looked back, only kept running, her defiant silhouette wavering in the shimmering heat. By the time he caught up, she had slowed to a staggering walk. Her breathing came hard and ragged, each gasp a desperate struggle. The desert had already begun to claim its toll. He rode past her, then circled back, cutting off her path. She stopped, chest heaving, hands bracing herself on her knees. When she finally straightened, her eyes held pure, unadulterated murder. "Get out of my way." Jeb remained in the saddle, one hand resting lightly on the horn. "There's nothing out here for 20 miles. No water, no shade. I know this land, not this part. These are the devil's bones. Even the snakes avoid it." She took a step forward, and he saw her hand instinctively move to her waist, to where a knife should have been, to where it almost certainly was before Barney Quill had taken it. Her fingers curled into a frustrated fist when they met only fabric. "I'll take my chances with the desert over you." "Why?" The question came out sharper than he intended. "What have I done besides take those chains off? You paid for me." Each word was a stone hurled, sharp and cutting. "That makes me your property in the eyes of every man who saw it happen. $3 or 300, It doesn't matter. I'm still owned. Jeb swung down from Shadow's back, and she immediately retreated 3 paces. He stopped where he was, making no move to approach. I'm not taking you anywhere. I'm not putting you in a house or a wagon. I'm giving you a choice. Men like you don't give choices. You give orders and call them options. You're right about some of us. He pulled the water canteen from his saddle and set it gently on the ground between them. I've done things I can't undo. Worn a uniform I'm not proud of. Followed orders that still wake me up screaming in the dead of night. He paused, watching her watch him, her gaze unwavering. But right now, I'm just trying to keep you alive long enough to get far from here. She stared at the canteen, and he could see the war raging within her thirst, battling pride. Why should I believe you? Because if I wanted to drag you somewhere, I'd have done it already. You're exhausted. I'm on a horse. It wouldn't be a fair fight. He took 2 steps back, increasing the distance between them. But I'm not here for a fight. Anya studied him for a long moment, and he could feel her measuring him. Not his words, but his stance, the subtle way he held himself. People who had survived what she had learned to read bodies, not voices. Finally, she moved, fast and low. She snatched the canteen and immediately retreated, putting 10 feet between them before she opened it. She drank deeply, water spilling down her chin. When she finished, she hurled the canteen back at him. He caught it instinctively. "What's your name?" he asked. "None of your concern." "Fair enough. I'm Jebediah Thorne. Used to run cattle north of here. Now, I don't run much of anything." He paused. "There's a trading post about 15 miles west, run by a woman named Elara Stone. She takes people in, no questions asked. If you let me, I'll get you there. Then you never have to see me again. And if I don't let you, then I'll follow you at a distance until you either reach somewhere safe or until you can't walk anymore." He met her eyes. "Because I've already got enough ghosts. I don't need another one." Something shifted in her expression. Not trust, but perhaps a flicker of recognition that he was speaking some version of the truth. She turned her face toward the west, where the sun was beginning its long, slow descent, and seemed to calculate something. 15 miles, give or take. She was quiet for a long time. Then, without looking at him, she said, "My name is Anya, and if you try to touch me, I'll take your eyes before you take a second breath." Jeb nodded slowly. Understood. Neither of them moved. The desert stretched out around them, vast and indifferent to their standoff. Finally, Anya started walking west. Not toward him, not away. Simply west. After a moment, Jeb led his horse and followed, maintaining a 20-foot distance between them. They walked in silence as the sun burned overhead. But both of them knew this wasn't trust. This was survival. And survival had its own brutal rules. Rules that would be tested as soon as they made camp for the night. Part 2. A Promise in Paint and Blood. Sunset came fast in the desert. A fleeting, bruised purple light bleeding into a palette of fiery orange and violent red across the western horizon. Jeb found a spot between 2 large, wind-worn rocks. A natural alcove that would offer some meager protection from the biting night wind. Anya stopped her relentless pace about 20 feet away, her back pressed against a towering boulder, and slid to the bare ground. Jeb, moving slowly and deliberately, unpacked his saddlebag without a single word. He laid out dried meat, a few hard biscuits, and another canteen of water. He divided the meager rations in half, placing one portion on a flat stone, then nudged it toward her with his boot. She watched him, her face a mask, unreadable in the fading light. "I'm not hungry," she stated, her voice flat. "You haven't eaten in days, probably," Jeb countered softly. I said, "I'm not hungry." Jeb picked up his own portion and began to eat slowly, keeping his eyes fixed on the deepening twilight rather than on her. After a few minutes, he heard a rustle. When he glanced over, the food was gone from the stone, and Anya was chewing, her face stubbornly turned away from him, denying him even the smallest acknowledgement of her hunger. The temperature plummeted swiftly once the sun had vanished entirely. Jeb built a small fire, just enough to ward off the encroaching chill and offer a flickering island of light in the vast darkness. Anya remained in her spot, arms wrapped tightly around her knees, a silent, unmoving sentinel. The firelight danced, catching the ancient paint on her high cheekbones, making the red symbols appear fresh, almost like newly spilled blood. "That paint," Jeb said carefully, breaking the heavy silence. "War paint, right?" She didn't answer at first, her gaze fixed on the mesmerizing flames. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she replied, "It's a promise." "To who?" "To myself." She finally looked across the fire at him, her amber eyes reflecting the light like polished stones. "Every mark means something. This one," she touched the stark stripe across her forehead, "is for my brother. This one," her fingers moved to her cheek, tracing the intricate design, "is for the children I protected. And this one," she outlined the symbol near her jawline, powerful and sharp, "is for the man I will become if I survive this." Jeb frowned slightly. "You mean the woman?" "I said what I meant." He let her words hang in the air, weighted with an unspoken history he could only guess at. After a long while, he spoke again. "You said you were captured 3 weeks ago. What happened?" Anya stared into the fire for so long Jeb thought she wouldn't answer, thought she would retreat into her silence once more. Then, her voice hollow, devoid of all emotion, she began. "Soldiers came to our camp. We knew they were coming. We could have run, scattered into the mountains. But there were children, 14 of them, too young to survive a chase through the high country." Her gaze remained on the flames, but Jeb could see the distant, terrible memories playing out in her eyes. "So I stayed. So I made a deal." Her voice was flat, almost detached. "I told them I would surrender if they let the others go." The commander agreed. He was a liar, but by the time I realized it, the children were already hidden in the caves. The adults led the soldiers in the wrong direction. By the time they figured it out, it was too late to track them. Jeb felt something cold twist in his chest. "You traded yourself." "I bought time." She looked at him then, and her eyes were hard, unyielding. "They beat me for it, kept me chained in a wagon for 2 weeks. When the first man tried to touch me, I took his knife and buried it in his leg. He lived, but barely." A ghost of a bitter smile touched her lips. The second man was smarter. "He waited until I was asleep. I woke up with his hands on me, and my hands found his face." Her voice remained unnervingly calm, utterly devoid of triumph or remorse. "Thumbs work well for eyes," I learned. The casual way she spoke of such violence made Jeb's stomach clench, not because of the brutality itself, but because of the chilling, undeniable necessity of it. "That's why Barney sold you for $3, he murmured, the truth hitting him with sharp clarity. "That's why no one wanted me at all." Her smile was a cruel, humorless thing. "Too dangerous, too much trouble. Better to let me die in the desert than risk another injury." Jeb poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks scattering into the night. "I had a daughter once. Anya went utterly still across the fire, her head turning slowly to meet his gaze. 16 years old. Looked a bit like you, actually. Same defiant eyes. Same way of standing, like the ground beneath her belonged to her alone. He paused, the words catching in his throat, heavy with years of unspoken grief. There was a raid on a settlement. I was part of the response team. We rode hard, got there too late. Buildings were burning. People were scattered in the chaos. Someone started shooting. I don't know who fired first. Maybe it doesn't matter. Your daughter died in the raid. Anya finished for him, her voice low. No. The word came out rough, tearing from his chest. She died because I was wearing a uniform. Because when we arrived, we didn't ask questions. We just assumed every person we saw running was an enemy. My daughter had gone to that settlement to trade. She was running toward us, trying to get to safety, and one of my men shot her. The silence that followed was absolute, thick and suffocating. Jeb gazed into the fire, the flames reflecting the unspeakable horror in his eyes. He didn't know, he continued, his voice barely a rasp. In his defense, he didn't know. But I was the one who trained him. I was the one who led that unit. I was the one who created a situation where fear mattered more than recognition. When Anya finally spoke, her voice was surprisingly gentle. So, you think buying me makes up for it? No. Jeb met her eyes across the dancing firelight. Nothing makes up for it. But maybe keeping you alive keeps me from being the same man who let her die. Anya stood abruptly, and for a terrifying moment, Jeb thought she might leave, vanish into the darkness. Instead, she walked closer to the fire, just outside its warmest circle, her silhouette stark against the glow. Your guilt is not my responsibility to carry. I know. And your daughter's death doesn't give you ownership of my survival. I know that too. They stood there, the fire between them, and something unspoken passed in the silence. Not forgiveness, not even full understanding, but a shared recognition that they were both carrying a weight that had nothing to do with each other, and everything to do with who they had been and who they were forced to become. What neither of them saw was the flicker of movement in the distant rocks behind them. Someone had been watching since they'd stopped, a silent predator in the desert night, and that someone had recognized Jebediah Thorne. Now, the real danger of the night was just beginning to take shape. The sound came just after midnight. A soft scrape of boot on stone carried on the thin desert air. Jeb was awake instantly, his hand moving to the rifle that lay beside him on the ground. Anya was already on her feet, her body tense, coiled and ready. They looked at each other across the dying embers, and in that fleeting moment, they were unequivocally on the same side. 3 men emerged from the darkness, their rifles glinting dully in the faint moonlight. Jeb recognized one of them immediately, Cyrus Fletcher, a man he'd served with years ago, a man who'd been there the day his daughter died. Thorne. Cyrus's voice was a cold, cutting blade. Fancy seeing you out here. Jeb stood slowly, keeping his hands visible, open. Cyrus, it's been a while. Not long enough. Cyrus gestured with his rifle toward Anya, a sneer twisting his lips. Heard you bought yourself some company at Barney's auction. Paying for women now. That's low even for you. I'm not his woman. Anya interjected, her voice cutting through the night like a honed blade. I belong to no one. One of the other men laughed, a coarse, ugly sound. That's not what the bill of sale says. Jeb felt rage building in his chest, a hot, bitter wave, but he kept his voice level, calm. What do you want, Cyrus? Justice. Cyrus stepped closer to the fire, and the flickering light revealed the hatred etched into his face, deep and unforgiving. "You cost me everything, Thorn. After what happened with your daughter, after you quit the unit, they blamed me. Said I fired without orders, stripped my rank, dishonorably discharged. My wife left. My children won't speak to me. And you just walked away." "I didn't walk away," Jeb said, the words heavy with pain. "I crawled. You got to crawl because you were the commander. I got buried." Cyrus's finger moved to the trigger, a chilling promise of violence. "So now I'm going to take from you what was taken from me. Everything." Anya moved so fast that no one had time to react. She snatched a burning branch from the fire, embers trailing like fiery tears, and swung it in a vicious arc at the closest man, hitting him squarely across the face. He screamed, a guttural sound of pain, dropping his rifle. Anya rolled, grabbed the weapon from the dust, and came up aiming it directly at Cyrus. But she didn't fire. Jeb saw her hesitate, saw the rapid calculations running behind her eyes. 3 men, 2 of them still armed. If she shot Cyrus, the others would kill her and Jeb both. If she didn't shoot, Cyrus might do it first. "Put the rifle down, girl," Cyrus said softly, his voice a dangerous hiss. "This doesn't concern you. Everything concerns me when I'm the one holding the weapon." Jeb took a step forward, his hand still raised. "Cyrus, she's not part of this. Let her go. Whatever you need to do it to me." "Noble," Cyrus spat on the ground. "But see, I think she is part of this. I think you care about keeping her alive, which means taking her from you hurts just right." That's when Lucas understood. Cyrus didn't want to kill him. He wanted to make him watch someone else die. Wanted to recreate the crushing helplessness Jeb had felt watching his daughter fall. Anya must have understood too, because her stance shifted. She wasn't aiming at Cyrus anymore. She was aiming the rifle at her own temple. Everyone froze. "You want to take her from him?" Anya's voice was eerily calm, steady as a stone. "Go ahead, but you'll get a corpse, not a captive. And his pain will be nothing compared to the fact that you failed to control me even in death." Cyrus's face twisted in an ugly snarl. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" She pressed the cold barrel harder against her skin, a defiant challenge. "I already told him I'd rather die than be owned. This just moves up the timeline." Jeb felt his heart hammering against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror. "Don't, Anya." She kept her eyes locked on Cyrus. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to lower your weapons. You're going to walk back into the desert, and you're going to let us leave. Because if you don't, you get nothing. Not revenge. Not satisfaction. Just the memory of a woman who chose death over giving you power." The standoff stretched, endless. Seconds felt like hours, each breath a struggle. Jeb could see Cyrus weighing his options, a silent battle raging within him. He could see the exact moment Cyrus realized she meant every word. Finally, painfully, Cyrus lowered his rifle. "You're insane." "No." Anya's smile was sharp, dangerous, a flash of pure defiance. "I'm free, and that terrifies you." Cyrus gestured to his men, and they backed away slowly into the darkness, vanishing as silently as they had appeared. But before he disappeared completely, he looked at Jeb one more time. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is," Jeb said quietly, his voice echoing in the sudden silence. "It's been over since the day she died. You just didn't want to admit it." They waited in silence until the sound of retreating footsteps faded completely. swallowed by the vast desert night. Only then did Anya lower the rifle. Her hands were shaking, a tremor she couldn't entirely suppress, but her face showed nothing. Jeb looked at her, his gaze searching. "Would you have done it?" She met his eyes, unflinching. "Yes." "Why?" "Because some things are worse than dying." She handed him the rifle, the metal still warm from her grasp, and being used as a weapon against someone else is one of them. They didn't sleep the rest of the night. They sat on opposite sides of the dead fire, watching the darkness. Something had changed between them. Not trust, not quite, but understanding. They were both survivors of other people's wars, shattered by different violences, but marked by the same deep scars. And maybe that was enough. What they didn't know was that by morning, they'd have to make a choice that would define everything that came next. Part 3. A New Compass. Dawn came with bruised purple light bleeding into gray, painting the eastern sky in hues of melancholy. Anya sat watching the horizon, her back still pressed against the cold rock, and Jeb could almost feel the war waging silently within her. She'd been still for nearly an hour, her fingers tracing intricate, forgotten patterns in the dust, as if seeking solace in the parched earth itself. Finally, her voice, soft yet clear, broke the long silence, though she didn't look at him. "The trading post. This woman you mentioned, Elara Stone. What about her? Would she help children?" Jeb felt a sudden, sharp tightening in his chest, a question he hadn't anticipated. He stood, brushing dust from his pants, the grit clinging to his clothes, a constant reminder of the harsh landscape. "How many children are we talking about?" Anya turned to face him then, and her eyes, usually so fiercely guarded, held a raw, desperate vulnerability he hadn't seen before. 14. Ages 5 to 12. Each word was a tiny shard of her armor falling away. "They're hiding in caves, 3 days north of here. I told them to wait 2 weeks. After that, if I didn't return, they were supposed to scatter and try to reach the northern territories on their own." A tremor passed through her. "It's been 3 weeks and 4 days. Her voice cracked, a sound of profound anguish. "They might have already left. Or they're still waiting, still hoping I'm coming back. They have some dried food I hid there months ago, water from a spring, but winter's coming. If they're still there when the first snow hits those mountains, they won't survive." Jeb walked to Shadow, his mare, and began checking the saddlebags, redistributing the weight of their meager supplies. Anya watched him, confusion, then a flicker of suspicion crossing her features. "What are you doing?" "Getting ready to ride north," he replied, tightening a strap on the saddle. "I didn't ask for your help." Her voice was sharp, a protective reflex. "I know." He met her gaze, his own resolute. "But those kids did, the day you traded yourself for them." He adjusted Shadow's bridle, his movements deliberate. "And if you're going back, you're not doing it alone and on foot." Anya stood slowly, her body tensed, ready for a fight, for an argument, for anything but this unexpected offer. "Why would you do this? You don't owe me anything. You barely know me." Jeb paused, his hands resting on the worn leather of the saddle. He looked past her, toward the desolate landscape, seeing not the present, but a memory from years gone by. "My daughter used to volunteer at the schoolhouse, taught the younger kids how to read. After she died, I found her journal. Her last entry said she was planning to start a lending library for children who couldn't afford books. She'd already collected 30 volumes, hidden them in our barn. He looked at Anya, his voice thick with emotion. She never got to give those books away. Never got to see those kids learn to read. But maybe I can make sure 14 other children get a chance she didn't. That's not the same thing, Anya stated, her voice softer than before, though still firm. No, Jeb conceded, the word a heavy weight in the stillness of the desert, but it's something. He held out his hand to her. Help me up. You're riding with me. We'll move faster that way. Anya stared at his outstretched hand like it was a venomous snake, every instinct she possessed screaming not to trust it, not to trust him. But the thought of the children, cold and hungry in those caves, warred with her ingrained suspicion. Slowly, reluctantly, she reached out and gripped his forearm. Her touch was hesitant, almost fragile, yet firm. He pulled her up behind him onto the horse. She sat rigid, keeping as much distance as possible while still maintaining balance, a silent warning in her posture. "If you try anything," she said, her voice a low growl close to his ear, "you'll lose your eyes before you take a second breath." "I remember," Jeb replied, his voice calm, unflustered. He nudged Shadow into motion. "Which direction?" "North," Anya answered, gesturing with her chin. Toward the red rock formations. They rode in silence for the first hour. The sun climbed higher, turning the desert into a furnace, baking the earth and shimmering the air. Anya eventually had to grip his shoulders to keep from sliding off when they crossed rougher terrain, her body still stiff. But the small gesture of necessity, a subtle shift in their dynamic. Each time she touched him, he could feel her tense, a coiled spring ready to snap, but she didn't let go. Around midday, she spoke again. "The children, most of them aren't related to me by blood. Their parents died in raids, sickness, accidents. Our tribe took them in because that's what you do. You don't leave children to die just because they're not yours." "Sounds like a good tribe," Jeb murmured. "Was a good tribe," she corrected, her voice suddenly bitter, edged with a pain he recognized. "Now we're scattered, broken. The soldiers made sure of that." Jeb felt the familiar, unwelcome weight of guilt settle in his stomach. "I'm sorry." "Sorry doesn't feed 14 hungry children," Anya retorted, her voice hard. "Sorry doesn't keep them warm when winter comes. Sorry is just a word people use when they want to feel better about things they can't fix." She was right, and he knew it. He didn't say sorry again. Instead, he asked, "What do they need besides safety?" "Everything," Anya replied without hesitation, a stark list of brutal realities. Food, warm clothes, blankets, medicine, a place to stay until spring when it's safe to move them further north. She paused, then added, her voice practical, devoid of hope. "Money for bribes, if we encounter soldiers, papers if we can forge them, luck if the spirits are listening." "I've got some money saved," Jeb offered. "Not much, but enough for supplies." "Why?" Her grip on his shoulders tightened imperceptibly. "Why would you spend your money on this?" "Because you were willing to aim a rifle at your own head rather than let someone use you as a weapon," Jeb said, glancing back at her, meeting her unwavering gaze. "That kind of courage deserves better than dying in a desert or watching children freeze in caves." He paused, then added, the words raw and honest. "And because my daughter would have done exactly what you did. She'd have traded herself without hesitation." Anya was quiet for a long moment, the only sounds the creak of the saddle and the rhythmic hoofbeats of Shadow. Then, so softly he almost missed it, she said, "Your daughter sounds like she was strong." "She was," Jeb confirmed. A faint, sad smile touching his lips. Got it. From her mother. Where's her mother now? Dead. Fever took her when our daughter was 10. I raised her alone after that. Did a terrible job of it, according to most people. Let her run wild. Taught her to shoot and ride instead of sew and cook. Sounds like you did exactly right, Anya murmured, and for the first time, Jeb heard a hint of approval in her voice. They rode on as the sun tracked across the sky, a fiery orb burning down on them. And for the first time since he'd paid those $3, Jeb felt like maybe he was moving in the right direction, guided by a compass that pointed not to escape or regret, but to something resembling purpose. What he didn't know was that Cyrus Fletcher hadn't left the territory as promised. He was still out there, a shadow dogging their every move, and he'd figured out exactly where they were headed. Part 4. The Children's Fire. The caves revealed themselves on the second evening, tucked into a towering cliff face that appeared to be solid rock until one knew precisely where to search. Anya slid off Shadow's back before Jeb had fully brought the mare to a halt. Her feet hit the ground, already moving. She scrambled up a narrow, winding path, her ascent swift and silent, with the unerring sure-footedness of someone who had navigated it countless times. "Nellie," she called out, her voice a raw whisper, barely audible above the rising wind. "Takakota! It's me!" Silence answered her, deep and suffocating. Jeb felt a cold dread settle in his gut as he followed her up the precarious path, leading Shadow carefully over the treacherous, loose stones. Perhaps the children had already left. Perhaps they'd been discovered. Perhaps worse. Then, a small, wary face appeared at the cave's dark entrance. Another followed. And then, suddenly, children were everywhere, pouring out of the cavernous darkness, their small voices rising in a chorus, crying Anya's name. They swarmed her, a tide of small bodies, grabbing at her clothes, her hands, her arms. Anya knelt, pulling them close, and Jeb watched her face transform. The etched hardness melted away, replaced by an expression both fiercely protective and utterly vulnerable. "You came back?" A small girl, no older than 10, whispered, her voice reedy with disbelief and hope. "We thought you were dead. I told you I'd come back," Anya murmured, her voice thick with emotion. She pulled back slightly, her gaze sweeping over them, quickly counting heads. "Where are Nayeli and Takakota?" An older boy, perhaps 12, stepped forward, his face alarmingly gaunt, cheekbones sharp beneath skin pulled too tight. "Nayeli's inside," he rasped, his eyes wide. "She's been sick for 4 days. A fever. Takakota's with her, trying to keep her cool with water from the spring." Anya's face went pale. She stood abruptly and moved with desperate urgency toward the cave entrance. Jeb followed, ducking his head to enter the low opening. The suffocating darkness inside was broken only by a small, struggling fire near the back. A teenage girl sat huddled beside a makeshift bed of dried grass and tattered blankets, where a small child lay terrifyingly motionless. Anya rushed to them, dropping to her knees. She touched the child's forehead, then jerked her hand back as if burned. "She's burning up. I gave her water, like you taught us." The teenage girl, Takakota, said, her voice trembling, eyes red-rimmed from crying. "I did everything you said, but she just got worse." Jeb knelt beside them, looking at the sick child. 6 years old, perhaps 7. Her breathing was shallow, fast, each breath a struggle. He'd seen this before. Infection, most likely. Without proper medicine, It would run its brutal course, one way or another. "I've got some willow bark in my saddlebag," he said, his voice low, practical. "For pain and fever, it might help." Anya looked at him sharply, as if she'd entirely forgotten his presence. Then, a curt nod. "Get it." He moved quickly, back down the narrow path to Shadow. When he returned, Anya had already organized the other children, her efficiency startling despite her grief. One child was carefully boiling water over the struggling fire. Another was tearing precious cloth into strips for compresses. Takakota was mixing something in a small, crude bowl, a paste made from crushed desert plants. Jeb handed over the willow bark, and Anya quickly mixed it with the hot water, letting it steep. When the concoction cooled enough, she gently lifted the child's head, coaxing small sips past her parched lips. "How long have they been living like this?" Jeb asked quietly, his gaze sweeping the desperate scene. 3 months in these caves," Takakota answered, her voice a fragile thread. "Before that, we moved every few days." Anya found this place, said it was safe to stay. Jeb looked around the sparse cave. Supplies were critically low. Empty pouches lay scattered, relics of dried meat long consumed. A single, threadbare blanket was shared among 14 shivering children. The spring water, he realized, was likely the sole reason any of them were still alive. "We need to move them," Jeb said, his voice firm. "Tonight, to that trading post I mentioned, Elara Stone's place. It's still a day's ride from here, but it's safe. She'll take them in." "Nayeli can't travel like this," Anya countered, her voice sharp with fear. "Then I'll carry her," Jeb said, meeting her desperate gaze. "But we can't stay here. If I figured out where you were headed, others can too. Cyrus knows I care about finishing what we started. He'll come looking." Anya's jaw tightened, a muscle clenching. "Then let him come," she hissed, her eyes blazing. "I'll finish what I started with the last 2 men who tried to take these children. There are 14 lives depending on you making the smart choice, Anya, not just the brave one." She flinched, as if he'd struck her. For a terrifying moment, Jeb thought she might lash out. But then her gaze fell upon the children. She really looked at them, saw their hollow cheeks and tired eyes, saw how they huddled close together for warmth, even though the true cold of winter had yet to descend. She saw, with chilling clarity, what her pride would cost them if she chose to fight instead of flee. "Fine." The word came out like she was spitting glass, sharp and brittle. "We move at first light. Give them 1 more night to rest." "First light," Jeb agreed, his voice softening slightly. "I'll keep watch tonight. You rest with them." She didn't argue. Perhaps she was too exhausted to fight. Perhaps she had finally accepted that accepting help wasn't the same as accepting ownership. Either way, she settled near the meager fire, the children instinctively curling around her like a litter of puppies seeking warmth and comfort. Jeb sat at the cave entrance, rifle across his knees, his eyes scanning the impenetrable darkness beyond the flickering firelight. Behind him, he could hear Anya's voice, soft and low, weaving an old tale for the children, something about a clever coyote who outsmarted bigger, stronger animals by using the wind to carry warnings across the vast canyons. He allowed himself a faint, tired smile. She was a fighter, yes, undeniably. But she was also this, someone who told stories to scared children in dark caves, offering a sliver of hope and normalcy. Someone worth those $3 and everything that had come after. The night stretched on, a vast, oppressive blanket. Jeb didn't sleep. He couldn't. Somewhere out there, he knew Cyrus Fletcher was coming, and when morning came, they would need to be ready for whatever horrors followed them out of these unforgiving mountains. Part 5. A New Horizon. The first streaks of dawn clawed at the eastern sky, painting the ridges with cold, unforgiving light. Just as Jeb knew they would, Cyrus Fletcher and his two grim-faced men appeared on the highest point, rifles glinting like predators' eyes. But Jeb had been ready. Before the first hint of purple had bled into gray, he'd moved the children, a silent, fearful procession guided by Takakota, down the treacherous mountain paths. They were already a good distance away, heading for Alara Stone's trading post, following the route he'd meticulously planned. Only he and Anya remained, standing exposed against the harsh, waking desert. Cyrus smiled then, a cruel twist of his lips that didn't reach his eyes. "Just the two of you," he called out, his voice carrying on the thin morning air. "Where have the children gone, Thorn?" Jeb stood firm, his hands empty but his gaze unwavering. "You're too late, Cyrus. I don't believe you." Cyrus gestured with his rifle to his two men. "Search the caves, and if you find so much as a shadow, bring it back." As his men began their climb toward the cave entrance, Anya stepped forward. Sometime in the night, she had washed the ancient symbols from her face, leaving her cheekbones stark and unadorned. But somehow, without the paint, she looked even more dangerous, more intensely herself. "You came all this way," she said, her voice sharp, cutting through the vast silence, "for revenge on a man who's already been punished by his own guilt. That makes you pathetic, Cyrus." Cyrus's face darkened, his smile vanishing, replaced by a cold fury. "Shut your mouth, girl." "My name is Anya," she retorted, moving closer, her step fearless, defiant. "And I'm not a girl. I'm the woman who chose death over submission. I'm the woman who saved 14 children, while you waste your life chasing ghosts." She advanced another step, closing the distance between them. "You want to know the difference between you and Jebediah?" She barely glanced at him, her eyes still locked on Cyrus. "He's trying to build something from his ruins. You're just kicking at ashes, hoping to start a fire that died years ago." I said. "Asterisk, shut up, asterisk," Cyrus roared, raising his rifle, pointing it directly at her chest. Jeb started to move, but Anya held up her hand, a small, imperative gesture that stopped him mid-stride. She kept her eyes fixed on Cyrus, unflinching. "Go ahead," she challenged, her voice steady, remarkably calm despite the cold metal aimed at her heart. "Shoot me. Prove that you're exactly the man who pulled the trigger without thinking. Prove that nothing has changed, that you learned nothing." "Anya," Jeb's voice was tight with fear, raw with warning. She didn't look away from Cyrus. "He needs to make a choice right now. Be the man who killed an innocent girl because he was too scared to think, or be the man who lowers his weapon and walks away. Be the man who breaks the cycle instead of feeding it." The standoff stretched, endless and agonizing. Jeb felt time itself slow, the desert holding its breath. Cyrus's hand trembled slightly on the rifle, his knuckles white. Then, from the caves above, his two men emerged, shaking their heads. "Empty, boss," one called down, his voice carrying clearly. "Nothing but dust and a dead fire." The children were truly gone. "You can't bring your honor back by taking ours," Anya said, her voice softening slightly, though no less firm. "You can't undo what happened, but you can choose what happens next." Slowly, painfully, as if the weight of the world rested on his shoulders, Cyrus lowered his rifle, His face was twisted with anguish, a raw grief he hadn't allowed himself to feel until this very moment. "It should have been different," he whispered, the words choked with regret. "Yes," Jeb said quietly, stepping closer to Anya. "It should have. But this is what we have. This moment, this choice." Cyrus looked at them both, his eyes haunted, and something in him seemed to break, then perhaps, subtly, begin to rebuild. "If I see you again," he said, his voice barely audible. "You won't," Jeb interrupted, his gaze resolute. "I'm leaving this territory, taking those children north where they'll be safe. You'll never see me again. You can spend the rest of your life hating me, or you can spend it building something better. Your choice." Cyrus stared at him for a long, silent moment, a battle raging within his gaze. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, his two men following in his silent wake. They watched until the three figures disappeared over the ridge, swallowed by the vast, indifferent landscape. Anya exhaled slowly, a long, shuddering breath. "That was stupid." "That was necessary," Jeb corrected, his voice raspy with the morning cold. "He needed to choose. We all did." They walked down the mountain together, side by side, the silence between them no longer a chasm, but a shared space. When they reached Elara Stone's trading post that evening, they found the children safe inside, huddled around a crackling fire, already fed and wrapped in warm blankets. Elara, a weathered woman in her 50s with kind, knowing eyes, looked up at Jeb as they entered. Jebediah Thorne. "Yes, ma'am. Heard about you," she said, her gaze steady, compassionate. "Heard you lost your daughter." She paused, then turned her attention to the bustling room full of children. "These children need someone to watch over them until spring, someone to teach them, keep them safe, help them heal. You interested in the job?" Jeb looked at Anya, who was kneeling with the children, letting them crowd around her, their small hands clutching her arms, their faces alight with a hope he hadn't seen there before. She glanced up, met his eyes for the first time since he'd seen her on that auction platform, and then she smiled. Not a wide, exuberant smile, but real. A slow, gentle curving of her lips that reached her amber eyes. "I think we both are," Jeb said, a lightness in his chest he hadn't felt in years. Elara nodded, her smile warm. "Good. Pay is terrible, work is hard, but the company's honest." Over the following months, within the sturdy walls of Elara's trading post, Jebediah and Anya built something neither of them had expected. Not a romance, not an ownership, but a partnership born of shared purpose and quiet understanding. They taught the children to read and write, using the few tattered books Elara possessed. They taught them how to mend clothes, how to plant a hardy garden in the unforgiving soil, how to survive in a world that hadn't been kind to them, but also how to find joy and laughter in unexpected corners. When spring came, green shoots tentatively pushing through the thawing earth, Jeb used his meager savings, bolstered by Elara's quiet generosity, to buy a small piece of land near the distant Canadian border. Far from soldiers, far from men like Cyrus, a place where children could run free beneath wide, open skies. One morning, Anya stood on the porch of the new, rough-hewn house they'd built together, watching the children play in the freshly sprouted meadow, their shouts echoing with unbridled delight. Jeb joined her, 2 steaming cups of coffee in his hands. He handed her one. "You know," she said, her voice soft, contemplative, "when you paid those $3, I meant what I said. I would rather have died." "I know," Jeb replied, his gaze on the horizon, watching the children. "But you didn't buy my life that day. You gave me the chance to choose it. She looked at him, her eyes clear, filled with a newfound peace. That's the difference. What changed your mind about living? She gestured toward the children, then to the vast expanse of the new land, and finally, to him. They did. And you, the choice itself. She paused, taking a deep breath of the crisp morning air. Turns out freedom isn't dying to prove you can't be owned. It's living because you finally can. Jeb smiled, a genuine, untroubled smile. My daughter would have liked you. I would have liked her too. They stood together in the morning sun, two people who had been broken by violence and grief, and had found a way to put themselves back together, piece by purposeful piece. The $3 had been a transaction, a desperate gamble in the Dust Devil Mesa. But everything that came after was a choice, and that, finally, made all the difference.